I wanted people to join my group. So I went and spent the time to make business cards on my own. And I walked around and invited people. And somebody that was one of the lay leaders from the church came up to me one day and said, "Why are you doing this?" I said, I want people to know Jesus just like you do. He was a great guy. And he goes, "But that's the church's job." But I just stood my ground and I said, but wait a minute, we are the church.
Well, hey everyone, welcome to the Intentional Churches podcast. My name is Erin Johnston.
And I'm Doug Parks. Glad to be here with Erin and Chad.
Yes, and we are here to give you practical wisdom and insight into leading your church and aligning to the Great Commission. So this is season 5 of the podcast. We are all about radical alignment. This season, how do we align our churches in the direction of the Great Commission? And we have a friend with us here this episode, Chad Booher. Chad, thanks so much for jumping in with us. Would you just give our listeners just a little snippet of who you are? Where are you? What's your family like? Where do you find yourself in church leadership in this season? Just tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure thing, Erin, and thanks for inviting me on. This is exciting. I'm so glad that you guys are already doing some of this and helping other people really live out the Great Commission, because that's been a big part of what I've been excited about for many, many years. I didn't grow up in the church, and so it took quite some time. I was actually 30 when I started to come to this place of finding Christ, and my mentor Mike, he really showed me who Jesus is. And because of that, I wanted other people to have it. And throughout the past little over a decade, that's been really my mission, is to share the gospel with other people, to have other people experience the life change that I've experienced. And so that led us through a season of me doing it through my workplace the best that I could, in the environments that I could, and then eventually getting asked to join church and be a vocational minister. And so I did that at a church in Virginia for a while. And then after several years of that, and God blessing the ministry there, my wife and I both started to feel this nudge, and I felt a calling. And so, and it's a little bit of a funny story, and we don't need to get into all of that, but we lived in Virginia. We were from Pennsylvania. And my wife said, "Well, if we're moving, I don't want to go anywhere that's always hot, and I don't want to move further away from Pennsylvania." So we moved to Florida, because that's how God works. And,
Perfect. Yes.
Yeah. And so we moved down here, and my whole mission moving here I didn't have a job lined up. I came down under the faith that God was going to have us make disciples that make disciples. And so we did that back in 2020. That was me and my wife and my daughter and my son. And we've been here ever since. And I actually wasn't planning to get into vocational ministry again. We started at a church. There were a lot of connections to our church in Virginia that we didn't know about. It's very exciting to be a part of a church that they really wanted to take discipleship to people individually, and actually in our mission statement at this church, it was to create biblical disciples in relational environments. And they were going to do that one at a time, just one person at a time. And I really liked that. So we stuck around. I just kind of did some consulting with the senior minister for a little while. And then he kept bugging me to be on staff. I told him no many times. And then he finally just said, "Okay, what would you do if you could work here?" And I said, I kind of wrote up this idea of being in the community, helping other people reach their neighbors, being in the schools, those kind of things, outside the wall stuff. And they loved it. And they said, "Well, we want to hire you, and we're not going to change anything in the job description you wrote." So I felt kind of like a jerk if I didn't take the job after that.
Amazing.
And here we are. A couple of years later, I'm the community engagement minister is the title. And I'm not real big on titles, but they needed to call me something so that I wasn't just this random guy in an office. So I've been doing that now for a couple of years, and we love it.
Wow, Chad, what a journey. Thanks for sharing that with us. And just so excited to learn with you and from you today. We're talking about radical alignment this season. And one of the things that we want to talk about, particularly with you, is this idea of like fighting against the institutional mindset and really like the professional pastorate. Like, we know that this exists. This has plagued the American church. This idea of, professional pastors and the church becoming more of an institution than a group of people seeking to follow Jesus together. And so I just want to talk about that. Maybe let's just start with some definitions around these things and how they affect the church. Like, how do you think of, if you had to describe this kind of institutional mindset or the professional pastorate? Like, how do you define those things, and how do you think they affect the church today?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. And it's interesting. If you want to get your car fixed, you take it to a mechanic, right? They specialize in fixing cars. And so somewhere in that mindset, I've seen that the pastorate's looked at like that. Okay, these are the professionals that understand how to disciple people, how to teach the gospel to people. They are the ones. And so then somewhere along the line, it's just become more and more that, okay, if I take them to church, if I can get my friend, my family member, if I just get them to church, then they'll do that. The pastor on stage, the staff, they'll help them become a Christian. They'll share Jesus with them. They'll baptize them. They'll disciple them, and everything will be great. They'll be saved. And it's taken away that Great Commission mindset of every one of us was called to go and to do this. And so and no one could do that. A pastor of a church of even 200 people, how would he disciple all 200 of those people? The God of the universe discipled 12, but somehow we're expecting these men that stand on stage and preach every week to disciple 200 or 2,000 or 20,000. How's that even possible to be in a mindset? But it is. And I think we do need to push back on that. The difficulty is the changes it brings about in the church, which I think you guys would probably know something about that too. The programs and things that stop whenever you put it in the hands of the people.
Doug, you bring kind of a national mindset. You work with churches all over the country. How do you think the institutional mindset or even the professional pastorate, how do you sense that that's affecting the church in America today, if you just kind of had to summarize?
Well, Erin, I would just say the institutional mindset of church leadership is so subtle. And we as church leaders so many times reinforce it, not on purpose. We're not doing any of this on purpose. But I believe that we're in a season where the modern church is repeating what the church of history has done from Constantine through Luther and the Catholic Church to the Protestant movement, where all of a sudden the organization acts as if it wins and grows people in Jesus. And it's, like Chad said, it's a professional pastorate's job to disciple them all or train them all up like that, as if the everyday common plumber or engineer in your church is not capable of carrying the gospel as a personal mission statement. So the subtle things I see, our listeners can ask themselves questions like, I was just with a pastor where I said this, and then I kind of felt bad because I was like criticizing one of their strategies. But if you're from a smaller church, it's very common for the preacher to stand at the door at the exit and shake every person's hand. What is that communicating to the people? Now, I know everybody wants to be connected to that, seeing the preacher, but it's subtly communicating a conversation. One of the things for us over the years at Canyon Ridge was whenever we did what I know I'm supposed to say, generosity initiatives, not capital campaigns, it was usually always for a building. And literally, one of the very first things I was asked as the executive pastor was, I need pictures. What are we communicating to our people when we lead with pictures? Or one last one, just like the buffet church. So if you were a church leader in the 80s, 90s, the pervasive strategy to grow a church was through this idea of the programmatic church. The more hooks you have in the water, the more people you catch. But on the other side of that, think about the unintended consequence of going after the felt needs of an individual that are not tied to the Great Commission. You inherently are sowing seeds of consumerism from the get-go in Christians to come to the institutional church and consume. And so this trend is in all of us. It's in me, it's in you, and it's very hard when you're in charge of the whole thing to be responsible and learn how do we do things differently so that we're not subconsciously reinforcing something that Jesus never. The Great Commission was given to individuals, never to an organization.
I was just thinking about how we'll do a series, right? And this happens in so many churches, and you'll do a series and go, okay, so this one's a good one to invite your friends. Invite your friends back next week. This will be really good for your friends. And it all does is reinforce if I bring them to church. If I bring them to church, this fixes it. They'll handle it.
That's right. That's exactly right.
Chad, why don't you talk to us for a minute about kind of how you became convicted about this personally? Like, how did you come to understand the Great Commission for yourself, moving to be personally aligned and to invite everybody around you to be personally aligned and not just rely on an institution? Like, how did that conviction come to you? How have you lived differently since that conviction? Talk to us about that for a minute.
Well, yeah, early on, like I said, in my journey there, we're doing Bible reading. I'm reading the Bible. That's how I'm going to grow as a Christian, is to understand the heart of God by learning His Word, but then doing something with it. And as I'm reading through the New Testament, it doesn't take long, right? Most people start out in Matthew, and so you get to the end of Matthew, and He clearly says right at the end of Matthew, "Now go and make disciples of all nations." And so right away, I was like, okay, this isn't for the professionals. This is for me. This was me. I'm supposed to, and someone was doing this with me, and so I knew what this felt like. I had kind of a roadmap, and so then I look at it and go, all right, well then this is for me to do. And I have this thing that I'm experiencing that's so life changing. It's so amazing for Jesus to be in my life and to change my life and to heal my marriage and for God to be blessing my life. And it wasn't rainbows and unicorns, but it was good. It was definitely better than it was before. And so I'm going, I got to share this. I got to do this. And it's on me, because my sphere of influence to reach certain people where I was working, they weren't meeting the pastor, and they weren't going to drive to the church. They live in a different area. It wasn't going to happen. They knew me. They didn't know, I wasn't at Doug's church, but just an example, they didn't know Doug. Right? So I can't invite them to come to Doug's church. That doesn't work that way, but they'll come to my house. They'll come to a group with me where we're going to do something that helps them become better men. Sometimes just praying for them and understanding with them, praying with them, for them. What are their felt needs? And so I decided a long time ago. It was shortly, let's say it would have been 2011 when I was baptized, and it was right around 2013 that I was really convicted of this, to say, like, I got to do this. This is on me. And it's funny you bring that up. I was doing that at the church that I was in. I had asked them, could I walk around? Could I promote stuff that I'm doing, whatever? And they said, sure. If you're doing interpersonal, like, we love that. We love the word of mouth. That's exactly, because they understood you can't solve all the world's problems from the pulpit. Like people think if you just announce everything, it's an announcement fixes it. It doesn't work. And so I wanted guys to join. I know. I wanted people to join my group. So I went and spent the time to make business cards on my own. Wasn't staff at the church. It was just on my own, to invite guys to, hey, here's the details. Here's my house. Here's what we're doing. And I walked around and invited people. And somebody that was one of the lay leaders from the church came up to me one day and said, why are you doing this? I said, I want people to know Jesus just like you do. He was a great guy. And he goes, but that's the church's job. And I looked at him, and this guy's been doing it a while longer than me, and I had a lot of respect for him, but I just stood my ground and I said, but wait a minute, we are the church. And it just hit him like a ton of bricks. We are the church. The church isn't a building. And that's one of the things we teach and train people on, even in the classes. That's one of the things we've done here at the church I'm at now, is teach those things, like, we're the church. We have a whole conversation around why church, and in it we say, this is what the church is. This is the definition of the word, and that makes you the church. This building burns down tomorrow, and next week we all show up on ground. We still have a church. We still have the church, but if no one shows up, it's just a building.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Oh man, that's so good. So as you think about, I love hearing your personal journey. How are you leading differently today because of your own convictions around this? Like, what are things that you are cautious to not do, or things that you are very intentional to do that help you personally stay away from the institutional mindset? We'll get into your church as a whole in a minute, but I'd love to hear just you personally, how you think about leadership differently.
Yeah, so I don't invite people to programs. Mm-hmm. That's a big thing. The outside of sports ministry, I would say our sports ministry program, I do a lot with that. I invite a lot of people to be a part of the community aspect of that. And then personally at home, with all the neighborhood people, that's where my bread and butter is, so to speak. So when I moved in 2020, within a month, I had a small group at my house. I wasn't connected to a church. I wasn't connected with a church until 3 months after that. It was, I want people to experience this, to know this. And so what are we going to do? And I know this is a hot take for some people, but the group that I started is called Whiskey in the Word.
Let's go.
Yeah. And I get it that, some people are going to be like, what are you can't do that. But I did it, and it's phenomenal, and it's still growing today because I would bring people in. Look, they're coming home from a hard day of work, and what are they doing? They're going to sit in front of the TV. They're going to have a beer, or they're just going to hang outside, play cornhole. It's Florida. It's nice all year here. I mean, people are outside. They're having a drink with their friends, and they're just outside, and they're experiencing life together anyway. So let them do that, but let's get around the Word. And so people love it. They come in, they invite their friends, and there is an invitation aspect to that. But they're inviting them into my home, or we're at someone else's home in the group. And those leaders, everyone in that group understands that I'm not going to disciple someone they bring, right? They're going to disciple someone that they bring. It's their role in the Great Commission to actually go and keep being in this person's life, continue to be accountability buddies, if you want to call it that, with them, to keep leading them closer and closer to those life-changing decisions. And the guys that I've been doing that with, that's been happening. We've seen guys go from being ready to divorce their wives to leading them in prayer as they decide to move out of state and start this somewhere else. And so, I mean, it's huge life change that happens because we're in people's lives. And part of that is inviting people regardless of what church they come to. That's another big piece of it. I don't care. It's about the kingdom. And so I do that. And my kids are the same way. I train my kids. We go through the Bible the same way, and it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if their friends go to church or not. And they don't typically start with, hey, you should come to church with me. It's, why don't you come over and hang out? Let's play. Let's have dinner, whatever. And they have tons of stuff about Jesus in their rooms and everything, and they'll just talk about it with their friends. But they don't invite them to church. That's not their number one goal. Right. It's let's win them over with the conversation about what's important to them and being in their lives.
I love what you're saying, Chad. It's, in our work, we are with a lot of church leadership teams, and this isn't an indictment, and I'm not trying to shame, but so many church staff and boards are not doing that basic blocking and tackling that you're talking about, that relational investment. This has become a coined phrase where people live, work, and play, like that is what we've got to call the American church back to. These are our roots, not these. And here's the thing. If you do this and you believe scripture to be true, inherently your church will grow. And then when it grows, the gravitational pull is going to be back to the institutional church and the professional pastorate. It's why our work at IC, we feel like we have to ground the organization so that we minimize the footprint of the institution to be a training and sending ground, and not this big behemoth brand that's going to win and grow people. So anyway, I just love that you're living that way, man.
I was just going to ask a question. Of
absolutely.
Both of you. Have you seen, because you're saying that, and that's true, and then the organization gets so big, it tends to go back to programmatic, right? But as you start to send people out and they live sent, then they're not really coming in for the programs. Like, you have to cut some of that back. Have you experienced that? And what kind of, how's that been received by the people that have been there?
Erin, why don't you share?
Yeah. We really set off in kind of this direction, I would say, during COVID. And so when things started to come back online post-COVID, we basically just said, these are all the things that just aren't coming back, programmatic things. And people didn't like that. I mean, we still have people that ask for certain things that used to exist here that just no longer do. And so as our church has grown, because we're growing like crazy, and it's funny, like our lead pastor will say, like, he's actually concerned that we'll grow too quickly because he's like, I don't want to lose who we're becoming. Like, I don't want to get misaligned. I don't want to forget who we are and go back to thinking that programs will solve our growth and all that. We just have been like absolutely committed. We are not adding programs here. any effort that we would use to add programs, we're going to use that effort in the direction of disciple making. Like go. You go out and encounter your people, or go out and train others to do that, but that has not been easy. And then you have people, in church leadership, even people on our staff that I love dearly, who have been here forever, who have made the shift to this new direction of really making disciple makers, but who are still just shepherds at heart. And so it's really hard to look someone in the eyes who shows up here on a Sunday morning for the first time and says these famous words, "What do you have for ... What do you have for me? What do you have for my so-and-so? What do you have for young adults? What do you fill in the blank?" Right? And so we've had to fight the urge to have an answer. And so really learning how to ask great questions, listen well, invite people into ownership of their own journey. We will stand with you. We will go with you, but we won't do it for you. We actually can't do it for you, That's been a hard road. And we lost a lot of people in 2020 and 2021 because they were ticked that we wouldn't bring back their favorite program, And we're just like, we just don't actually have clarity how those programs help us make disciple makers. They're good. They're not inherently wrong or bad or any of those things. But, and I think the thing we're wrestling with even today is we want to invite people into rich community that's focused in the direction of making disciple makers and training and celebration and all those things. And just having this conversation last week, we don't want to fill people's time with church things. We don't want all their free time to be filled with things that require them to be at the church, because that's pulling them away from their neighborhoods and from their places of influence in their everyday lives. And so trying to find the right balance, what's the right balance of training and connection and those things that deeply matter so that they can make meaningful connections. So that's more than you asked for, Chad, but I would just say, I feel you in the struggle of that, and we have faced a lot of challenge in that. So,
well,
Doug,
I would say this, Erin, that what we're all going through right now, I want to give us a note of encouragement as church leaders, and that is, it's not the program or the class or the silver bullet that is going to crack this code. It is going to be the practice and intent of the leaders. So I believe you can still have a pick your thing, growth track, or you can have a women's whatever programmatically you bought into. But if you don't shift that experience and your own personal expression, like Chad's talking about, to become an example of that, then you will end up with what we've been producing over the last 30, 40, 50 years or whatever, where we're actually, the unintended consequence is we're sowing in, when we have all those church activities, we're sowing in a very consumeristic underbelly to why people show up at church. And again, remember, Christ's call for all of us is to die to self, not what do you have for me? Eventually that question should go completely away if you're a longtime Christian. It should be a calling to dying to self. So if you remember this, if you're old enough to remember this idea, one of the silver bullets that came along for a while was this idea of simple church. There was a book about it. And I know a ton of churches who were programmatic churches who tried to shift to simple church, and all their people left. A lot of people left. They were upset. And so you, as a leader, this thing I'm trying to get on, the importance of you practicing the Great Commission personally and being able to have stories of wins and failures in that. And then you bringing a different intent to how you program these things, and not thinking that content leads to transformation. Content does not. It's only a small piece in the life of a believer that leads to transformation. And somehow in the 40-year run of church growth, we've all come to believe somehow that if we just preach more or have more Bible studies and more content consumption, it will transform and enlighten us. It's not true. You have to go live what you're learning. That's the crucible of like transformation of the individual's heart. Anyway, I am going way off on a tangent. Sorry about that.
It's good. And I just want to add, we still have some of the programs we had pre-COVID. But we have had to change the invite. We have had to change people's expectations about what will happen there and what their responsibility is in that we don't, our lead pastor often says, we don't invite people to the table. We invite people to the kitchen. So you're going to come help us create the kind of environment that you would want to perpetuate to others. We're not just going to serve it up on a silver platter for you. So that's a different way to think about things. Chad, we always love to switch to just get practical, especially to our listeners, who are many of which are church leaders who are we're all just navigating our way through all these different challenges, right? And I think this idea of the institutional mindset that just pulls us back all the time. I know many of our listeners are struggling with that. They might themselves just be kind of recognizing that, or they've recognized it. Now they're like, what are we going to do about this? I would love to hear you speak from like your lens as somebody who works in a church. What are the really practical things that you guys are doing in your current context to break this institutional mindset?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you. Because there's a lot we could go into, probably more than we have time for, but I could give you some. I want to go back to something you said because it leads into this. I read maybe a couple months ago, and I couldn't quote the source, but it was talking about how they asked the question of non-believers and believers, right? So why wouldn't you invite the other side of the fence to dinner at your house? And the folks that were not believers yet said, well, we feel like we will be judged. Okay, that's and I can understand where that would come from. I don't think that's always true, but I get how that would be. So then they ask, okay, but what about the folks that already believe? You believe this is true. Why aren't you inviting your non-believing neighbors, your folks that you're trying to lead? Why aren't you inviting them over? And they said, because we're always at church doing all these things.
Yeah.
I'm not home to invite them to dinner. And so you bring up a good point, and that's really some of the things that we're shifting towards. It takes time to move the big ship, like you said, and so we're shifting more towards that. Like I am a big proponent of when we start what we call community groups. We call them community groups for a reason. They're in the community. They're about finding people in your community. We don't like to have them on campus. Now there's some exceptions to that, but for the most part, we don't have them on campus. Right? I asked for them to be in homes because then you're inviting your neighbors to come in. You're not going to invite your neighbor that literally lives a door down from you to drive their car the same time you're going to drive on the same road you're going to drive over to the church so that you guys can meet face to face when you live next door.
It sounds like
that
insanity
seems silly
when you say it like that. We lost our minds.
Yeah.
Right. So promoting groups in the neighborhoods is good. We also promote. We have a entry point called Discover Creekside, and we revamped it. One of the very first things I did when I came on staff was revamp that, and we turned it from one hour and a half meeting that really was about church doctrine and stuff that was so boring and so organizational. We turned it into a 4-part series, and each one of those parts, it's really about you learning how to share your faith with other people. So our Why Jesus, we walk through and train the 3 circles. So if you're familiar with that tool, where we walk through how to share the gospel and why it's important, we share that with people. We talk about in church, like I said, then we are the church and what to expect. And at the end of that conversation, we give them, if you're going to be a member here, here's some expectations. It's not just, hey, you finished a class, sign a paper. It's no. Mm-hmm. You're gonna serve, but you're also going to be in a group. You're going to be reading your Bible, right? And you're going to use this thing called Bless Every Home. I don't know if you're familiar with that tool, but we are big proponents of Bless Every Home. So you're starting to look at your neighborhoods, your neighbors. You're praying every day for your neighbors. You're tracking that because it helps keep you accountable, and it leads to this life of you constantly knowing your neighbors and praying for them. And that has paid dividends. We have seen people come in on a Sunday morning and run up to me because they know that I'm a big proponent of Bless Every Home, and because I teach a lot of these classes. And so they'll come up and they'll be like, oh, you won't believe it. I met this person today at church while I was greeting. And I'm like, that's great. Are they new? And yes, they're new, but this is why it's so exciting, Chad, because I knew their name. When they said it, I was like, I know their name. When they walked away, I mentioned to my husband, my wife, and they go, yeah, they're on our list. They're praying for these people. And and yet they haven't made it down to that conversation yet. Maybe haven't seen them outside in the yard, whatever it is. But they're praying for, and here they are at church, and now they get to meet them. And then they're going to go out, and the next time they see them, it's going to be hey, it's you. Let's hang out. Let's do these things. And then it leads to baptisms. Yeah. And one of the big shifts that I had at the last church that was really good, that was influential there and has been influential here, is we are really pushing for, it is not me, it is not our senior leader, it is not other staff members to baptize you. And we celebrate and we record how many individual unique baptizers we have, because we want to see other people lead their families and do it. When a husband and wife come in, let's say, it is very common. We will, if they don't know anyone else, like, I'll baptize the husband first. And then I look them right in the eye and, you're baptizing your wife. Like, I'm not doing it. You're the one living with her. You're the one that's the leader and discipling her. I'll help you, but you're baptizing her and you're baptizing your kids. And if your neighbors come, you're baptizing your neighbors. Like, this is the way it works. It's not on me. And that's huge. We've seen a huge shift in the mentality, but it leads, as I think you guys have alluded to less people being available to volunteer in certain areas. And so we have to realize that if we're going to have all these programs, then we have to staff them ourselves. And then you really go, is it really about them, or is it about us? Right? Are we just doing it because we want it versus they need it?
Oh man, Chad, so much good stuff. I feel like you and I should have a conversation sometime, because it sounds like our churches are in similar journeys. I just want to just draw attention as we wrap this up to something you said, and maybe a question just to offer to our listeners is, it would be worth reflecting on what the first few things that happen to somebody that come to your church, do they point to them as a maker of disciple makers? Does it point to the Great Commission, or does it point to the institution? Because that would be really revealing. Does your newcomer class point to your church, or does it point to the individual responsibility we have as believers? Baptism, all those things would be great places to start, like Chad has described here. And then another question I would offer to our listeners is, for your core people, your staff, and even your core volunteers, how many evenings a week are you asking them to be committed to being on the campus of your church? And if it's more than one or two, definitely more than two, you should be asking questions, because we are in the way of helping people live meaningfully in their neighborhoods if we're taking up all their time, to put it not so delicately. So Chad, thanks for pointing us to those things, and Doug, thanks for the national mindset that you bring as well. We all are just going to have to fight the institutional pull. And so, Doug, any last thoughts?
No, because I'll just start preaching again.
Okay.
near to my heart. So
that's right. Well, I just want to thank our listeners for listening to the Intentional Churches podcast, and just want to offer one more thing. If you haven't heard already, the Intentional Churches Conference is coming back in April of 2025. We're super excited about that. And so for a limited time, you and your team can get access to early bird pricing. And this is the lowest that the registration price will ever be. So make sure you take advantage of that, because it ends soon. And so you just want to register quickly. So make sure you visit intentionalchurches.com/podcast for all the details. Chad, it's been a pleasure. Doug, always a pleasure. Thank you both. And we'll see you next time on the Intentional Churches podcast.